everybody, I'm Aaron Simmons. This is Philosophy for Where We Find Ourselves, May 16th, 2023. Hope you're having a great day. I just got back from doing some mountain biking, had a lovely morning, and now after doing this video, I'm going to dive into reading some draft essays for a new book I'm working on with some colleagues, and tonight I'm going to watch my son play a little tennis. So all in all, it's important that we realize joy is possible. So today is a day that has many such opportunities for me, and I hope it does for you as well. Quick reminder, get subscribed to the YouTube channel, hop over to my website, check out the content there, jaaaronsimmons.com, and while you're there, get subscribed to my monthly newsletter as well. It comes out the first of every month. A new one will be on the way here as we go into June, and so I'd love to share it with you. Today I want to respond to a question that was raised by a viewer a few weeks ago, a rather technical question about different versions of God that are understood within traditional theisms. So I'm going to try to address that and in the process maybe open up some different ideas and lines of thought that we might want to pursue in the future. As always, please drop comments and give me suggestions of where you would like me to go, videos you'd like to see, topics you'd like for me to consider. In the next few weeks, I'm actually going to be looking at the question of technology and artificial intelligence and try to give you some reasons why I am, perplexed, not worried, but certainly cautious about the rise of AI, how that is moving forward, the different kinds of philosophical issues it might present for us. But also I'm going to do some videos that are trying to show you why I'm not really, anxious about this, why I'm not worried about AI. And in fact, ultimately, the really big questions for human existence are long-standing questions, not ones that are radically transformed just because we get different types of technologies that start showing up on our contemporary landscape. So those are coming up in the next few weeks. Hope you'll join me for them. Today, though, I want to talk about theism. And in order to unpack this, let me start by telling you about the way I teach my philosophy of religion class. I do this about once a year, and in that class, I don't do what lots of faculty do, where they jump immediately into arguments for the existence of God or considering challenges to the existence of God, such as the problem of evil. Those are both important things. I cover both of those things in my class. But I start by trying to unpack some of the assumptions that are operative in the concepts and categories that we use so frequently in traditional philosophy of religion, and often without really taking stock of what these terms are doing for us and how they're already shaping and impacting the thought before we move forward. So, understandably, we start by thinking through what is religion. We look at religious studies, critical theory of religion, trying to unpack that idea, make sense of how it's got a very particular history in light of colonialism, imperialism, etc. But we also think about who's God? Which divinity are we talking about? And recognize that there are radically important differences between theistic and non-theistic religions. That there are important differences even within theism, between womanist and queer theoretic and different models of liberationist theologies that are all theistic and yet understanding the divine in different ways from what might be, again, traditionally assumed in our textbooks in philosophy of religion. Well, one way in which that conversation usually goes in my class is to try to let the students understand that what traditional philosophy of religion is concerned about when it talks about God or when it talks about religion is almost always what can be referred to as classical theism. Classical theism is basically the view of the divine traditionally held by the world's great monotheisms, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And in these different traditions, God is understood as an omni-God, as a superlative being where all the predicates that convey excellence are appropriate to the divine. So God is all-powerful, omnipotent. God is all-knowing, omniscient. God is all-good, omnibenevolent, etc. Well, this account of the divine has a long-standing tradition. It has a lot to recommend it. And it's the root, we might say, of the traditional challenges to theism, such as the problem of evil. In the particular case of the problem of evil, classical theism says God is all powerful, God is all good, and yet there is evil in the world. How could that be possible? This seems to suggest that God is either not all powerful or not all good. Well, that very problem, again, nests in these assumptions about theism already operative in our discourse. What if we started to allow ourselves to look at other ways of making sense of theism, even within, let's say, the Christian tradition, in ways that then maybe reframe things like the problem of evil or position it differently for us? So I'm going to look at two of those today, just to, again, try to respond to the viewer who was asking about these differences. And I want to look at process theism and open theism. Now, I'm not going to go into all of the comprehensive reasons that these are different and how they differentiate from each other, but I am going to try to give you a general sense of what's going on and why it matters that we realize there are these different options in play. So if classical theism is the omni-God, God who is all of the excellences, process theism takes issue with the idea of omnipotence at its most basic. And it says, look, if God is all good, all loving, and all powerful, then evil should be gone. Evil is real. Therefore, we either challenge the love of God or the power of God. We aren't going to challenge the love. That's essential. So we have to rethink the power of God. Now, in doing this, that doesn't mean that therefore God can't do anything, say, or that God is not still an agent or still has desires or will relative to worldly affairs. The idea typically for process theists is that we've got to realize that God's power is constrained by typically material reality. That there are simply things God cannot do because it would violate God's nature relative to human freedom and our embodied reality, our embodied existence. Now, what's compelling about process theism is pretty clear, pretty easy to see. It seems to say that the love of God is where all the emphasis goes, and so we rethink power in the name of love in such a way as to try to overcome the problem of evil, not worry about evil, because it turns out that God wants to get rid of it. God works so hard as God can to eliminate evil, but ultimately evil is simply a factor of creaturely existence as vulnerable, embodied beings like us. Well, open theism wants to say, look, very compelling account, process folk. The emphasis on divine love is absolutely right. The problem is it comes at too high a cost if we start radically rethinking omnipotence. Instead, say open theists, we need to rethink omniscience. Not to deny that God has omniscience, but we've got to rethink what omniscience means. So traditionally, omniscience just means, God knows everything that's knowable, which includes all these contingent future events. This is why nothing is really a surprise to God. Open theists think, though, that there is openness in two senses in play across the board. One, God is open to the future, which means the future is really open to our influence, that our will really makes a difference. But secondly, God is open to us in helping to shape that future. So the future is open and God is open to our input and our engagement, our relational capacity to help shape the future in particular ways. Now, the thing here between the openness and process folk is they both emphasize the radical love of God. They disagree on then how we make sense of God's power to act what's called unilaterally in the world. Can God override human freedom to eliminate evil? Well, the openness folks tend to think God can, but typically doesn't. That there's a different model of making sense of the divine whereby God is actually experiencing time with us insofar as God is invested in the relational risk that love requires. Therefore, the open theists, like myself, have to keep biting the bullet of the problem of evil. It doesn't somehow go away. It's just a thing that now becomes intractable as part of our religious existence in light of a loving God and a world where vulnerability continues to define our experience. For the process folk, That's just not good enough. And we've got to go further. We've got to actually realize that God can't do what the openness folk continue to think God could. And only if God can't do we then really get an account of the love that goes far enough to make sense of evil in the world as simply regrettable, tragic, but not something preventable. Now, wherever you come down, you can see that this is a debate with some real consequence. It's not the case that openness or process folk are traditional classical theists, because both of them are emphasizing the radical relationality by which the God of omni-predicates is actually rethought relative to radical, humbled, kenotic, relational life. Love becomes, as Jean-Luc Marion will say, the highest predicate and the most theologically appropriate name for the divine. This is true for both open and process folk. The difference then is how that cashes out. Is it the case that love is something operative alongside God's ability still to do whatever is logically possible, God's ability still to unilaterally intervene in human affairs, or God can't do that precisely because of the type of love that God displays, that God deploys in relation to us? Now, I'm not going to try to answer this question for you. I'm just wanting to set up for you these options in order to hopefully help the viewer that asked about this make sense of what's at stake and why it would matter that one would choose one instead of the other. For my part, I identify as an open theist, and the reason for that is because I think that there is too much lost in the process model that is important to maintain relative to God as an agent, as a person. And these are fraught concepts for sure. The traditional notion of personhood has far too often been used to exclude those with disabilities, say, from counting as persons. And that is evil. That is tragic itself. But if we think about personhood simply as the name given to radically important moral dignity that is non-interchangeable with another, then I think personhood is still something well worth defending and well worth advocating, both for all members of humanity and also for the divine. If God is not at least personal, then I don't know what it means to talk about real relationship with the divine in ways that could be made sense of given our human experience and our embodied way of making sense of the world. For process folk, they think that is simply too restrained, too restricted, and we've got to open up the idea of the divine in order to overcome some of these traditional challenges. They might be right. I am unpersuaded by some of the process arguments, but I hope that this has at least allowed you to see where these, not lines are drawn, but where these groupings, these communities of discourse and thought and practice tend to be centered in order to allow you to make sense of why we are wrong to simply think that theism is static or unitary. That's the big takeaway. In the same way that theism is dynamic, Christian theism is dynamic, multiple, we even more so need to recognize that religion is the same. There are lots of different ways of making sense of these terms, these concepts, and as responsible philosophers of religion, and I would suggest as members of goodwill in pluralist, deliberative, democratic contexts, we are better off when we realize there are more than one way to make sense of things that we so often assume are obvious. A little bit longer video than normal today, and I apologize for that. I try to keep these under 10 minutes, but let me recommend, if you want to go a little further into these ideas, an interview I did with two very influential open theists, Greg Boyd and John Sanders. I did it here on the YouTube channel probably 2 years ago, thinking about where is God in the midst of a pandemic, and some of these debates about open and process theism really get cashed out there with a very practical bent. So I'm going to link that in the description below. Please check it out if you'd like a longer, more full-throated account, comprehensive account of these differences between different types of theism. All right. Again, go find joy today. Get on the mountain bike, take a walk, enjoy a good piece of cake, hug somebody you love. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll plan to see you next time, unless a piano falls on our heads.